Paris, 1925. A scrap metal dealer named André Poisson walks out of a luxury hotel holding a government contract. He just paid $70,000 for the Eiffel Tower. In 2 days, he will realize he has been scammed. But here is what makes this the greatest con in history. The man who sold it to him will do it again, 5 years later, to someone else, and get away with it. Again. His name was Victor Lustig, and almost nobody knows who he is. Paris in 1925 was a city trying to forget it had almost been destroyed. World War I had ended 7 years earlier. The economy was fractured. The government was broke. And the Eiffel Tower was quietly falling apart. The tower had been built in 1889 for the World's Fair, always meant to be temporary. A novelty, but it never came down. And by 1925 it was rusting. Maintenance costs were impossible to justify. And inside the French government, serious people were having serious conversations about whether the most famous structure in the world should simply be sold for scrap metal. These conversations were not public. They were happening behind closed doors. Victor Lustig read a small mention of this in a newspaper, and he felt something click. Victor was Czech, born in 1890. By 30, he had refined fraud into something closer to an art form. 5 languages, 32 known aliases, cons across Europe and America. He had one gift that cannot be taught. He could walk into a room of strangers and within minutes know exactly who wanted something badly enough to stop asking questions. In that newspaper article, he saw the perfect setup. Not because the story was true, but because it was believable. And believable was all he ever needed. He spent 2 weeks preparing. Victor was meticulous. He researched real government officials, studied the structure of French ministerial departments, ordered stationery with official letterhead, had government stamps made, hired a man to pose as his secretary, then rented a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, directly across from the French government buildings. Everything about the setup communicated one thing: power. He sent letters to 6 of the largest scrap metal dealers in Paris. Formal, precise, slightly mysterious. The French government was considering selling the Eiffel Tower for scrap. A small number of qualified dealers were being invited to a private briefing. Discretion was essential. All 6 men showed up. Think about that. Experienced businessmen, successful, skeptical. Every single one of them walked into that hotel. Because the letter felt real, the hotel felt real, and the idea, as outrageous as it sounds, was not actually far from the truth. Victor greeted them with the measured, slightly bored confidence of a man who did this kind of thing regularly. Then he took them on a tour, black cars outside the hotel, driven to the Eiffel Tower, walked them around the base, pointed out the rust, the water damage, the structural problems. He talked about the maintenance budget in the kind of specific numerical detail that only an insider would know. Back at the hotel, he invited sealed bids. Highest offer wins. Move quickly. And he reminded them, not a word to anyone. The moment this became public, the entire deal would collapse. 5 of the 6 went home to run their numbers. But Victor was not thinking about those 5. André Poisson was 38 years old, reasonably successful, but he had never quite broken into the upper tier of Parisian commerce. He knew the names of the men who got invited to the important meetings. He just had never been at the table, and here suddenly was an invitation that changed all of that. Victor had spotted him the moment he walked in. Not because Poisson was the wealthiest, but because of the way he looked around the room when he first arrived. A man who belongs in that room does not look around it like that. A man who has always wanted to belong does. After the group meeting, Victor asked Poisson to stay behind. He closed the door, sat down across from him, and then did something that makes absolutely no sense. He asked for a bribe. This process, he said quietly, is not entirely clean. Certain officials expect to be compensated personally. If you want this contract secured, I will need a separate payment for discretion. That should have been the moment Poisson walked out. That should have been the red flag that ended everything. Instead, it did the opposite. Because here is what Poisson heard. Confirmation. The thing that made the whole situation finally make sense. Of course there was a bribe. This was government. This was how things worked at this level. The men who got the real contracts understood how the game was actually played. The bribe did not make Victor seem like a criminal. It made him seem like an insider. Poisson paid $70,000 for the contract plus a separate envelope for Victor's discretion. Victor handed him a sealed document with an official stamp, shook his hand and walked him to the door. He was on a train to Vienna before midnight. 3 days later, André Poisson walked into the ministry to finalize the transfer. The name on his contract did not exist. Nobody knew about any sale. Nobody had ever heard of him. He stood in that government corridor and understood what had happened. And then he went home. No police report. No warning to the other dealers. He sat with what had happened and made a calculation. If he reported this, he would not be the victim of a sophisticated fraud. He would be the businessman who tried to buy the Eiffel Tower from a stranger in a hotel. He would be a joke. His wife would know. His competitors would know. Every contact he had spent a decade building would know. The money was gone. But his reputation, if he stayed quiet, was intact. So he stayed quiet. In Vienna, Victor bought a French newspaper every morning, looking for one thing, any mention of the scam. Day 1, nothing. Day 5, nothing. 2 weeks, not a single word. Victor sat back and understood something most people never figure out. Shame is more powerful than justice. Given the choice between exposing a crime and protecting their own dignity, most people protect their dignity every time. He folded the newspaper and started planning. 5 years later, Victor Lustig returned to Paris. His second mark was a man named Nissard. A wealthy dealer, older than Poisson, more experienced, harder to read. Victor spent 3 weeks on him instead of 2. More meetings, more manufactured detail. He had learned something from the first time. The longer you let a man convince himself, the less work you have to do. By the time Nissard sat down to sign, he believed in the deal completely. Not because Victor had pushed him, because Victor had been patient enough to let Nissard push himself. He paid, similar amount, same sealed contract, same handshake. This time Nissard went to the police within 48 hours. He gave a full description, handed over the documents, filed everything correctly. But Victor was already in Belgium. And then the French government did something that tells you everything about how shame works at every level. They buried it. No press release. No public manhunt. Because explaining this publicly would have required them to admit that the same man had sold the Eiffel Tower twice, and they had not caught him either time. The embarrassment principle worked on governments too. Victor crossed the Atlantic and kept moving. He once convinced Al Capone to hand over $50,000 for a machine that could print perfect counterfeit bills, then calmly refunded most of it when the machine failed to perform, walking away with $3,000 profit and somehow his life intact. That particular story deserves its own video. In 1935, federal agents arrested him in New York. Not for Paris. Not for the Eiffel Tower. Just for counterfeiting American currency. 20 years. Alcatraz. Then a federal prison in Missouri. He died there on the 9th of March, 1947. Pneumonia, 57 years old. His death was noted in a handful of small papers. None of them mentioned the Eiffel Tower. Victor Lustig understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn. People do not get conned because they are stupid. They get conned because they want something. And the moment you want something badly enough, you start doing the work of convincing yourself. The con artist does not close the deal. The mark closes it himself. André Poisson wanted to belong. That desire built the con more effectively than any fake document Victor could have produced. And when it fell apart, shame kept it buried. Not stupidity. The completely human calculation that some losses hurt less when nobody else knows about them. Victor Lustig did not beat these men. He understood them, and that understanding twice was worth a fortune. The Eiffel Tower still stands in Paris, one of the most visited landmarks on Earth. And buried beneath that story, almost completely invisible, is the fact that a Czech con artist with 32 aliases sold it twice before anyone noticed, and walked away both times without a single consequence. If you had not watched this video, you still would not know his name. Subscribe, because the next one makes this look small.